He wasn't supposed to be home yet. The driver had barely turned off the engine when he heard shouting from inside the house. A crash followed. Then a voice he hadn't heard raised in years, soft, trembling, and begging. He pushed the front door open. And what he saw in that moment changed everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and the woman he had married. Before we go any further, take a second to subscribe to the Black Voices, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. These stories come from real emotions, real struggles, and real people, and your voice helps keep them alive. Marcus Ellington built his life on control. Every meeting started on time. Every deal was backed by research. Every employee knew exactly what was expected of them. By the age of 42, he had turned a small logistics company into a nationwide transportation empire. People called him disciplined. Some called him intimidating. But the few who knew him closely understood that his strength came from somewhere, much deeper than boardrooms and balance sheets. He still lived in the same part of Chicago where he grew up, though his house now stood at the end of a long, tree-lined street instead of beside a broken sidewalk. He could have moved to any neighborhood in the country, but he never forgot where he came from, and he never forgot who carried him there. When Marcus was 8 years old, he had no last name anyone remembered. He lived in a foster home that rotated kids like furniture. Some stayed a few weeks, some a few months. He stayed for years. There was one woman who worked there part-time, a quiet older black woman with soft gray, curls and hands that always smelled like soap and cinnamon. Her name was Lillian Carter. She wasn't a social worker. She wasn't a supervisor. She cleaned the halls, folded the laundry, and sometimes cooked when the kitchen staff called in sick. But she was the only one who ever sat beside Marcus when he cried at night. She was the only one who remembered his birthday without checking a file. She would sneak him a warm biscuit from the kitchen and whisper that the world wasn't done with him yet. She told him that one day he would have a home so big it would echo when he laughed. He didn't believe her at the time, but he held on to her words like they were gold. When Marcus turned 11, Lillian did something no one expected. She filled out adoption papers. She had no husband, no savings, and a tiny apartment above a laundromat. But she had love, and she had stubborn faith. It took months of interviews and inspections. The social workers didn't think it made sense. But Lillian never gave up. One cold afternoon, she walked out of that foster home holding Marcus's hand, and for the first time in his life, he belonged to someone. Their apartment was small, but it felt like a palace to him. The walls were painted a soft yellow. The couch had a floral blanket over it to hide the worn spots. Every Sunday, Lillian played old gospel records while she cooked. The whole place would smell like cornbread and slow-simmered greens. She worked 2 jobs. During the day, she cleaned offices downtown. At night, she helped at a diner. Marcus often woke up to find her shoes by the door and a note on the table telling him to finish his homework and heat the food she left in the fridge. She never complained. Not when the landlord raised the rent. Not when her back ached from standing all day. Not when Marcus came home with torn sneakers or report cards that weren't perfect. She just kept pushing, and she made sure he pushed too. She used to sit at the small kitchen table with him at night and say that education was a key. She told him that nobody could take knowledge away from him. She didn't have much schooling herself, but she respected books like they were sacred. Marcus studied hard. He earned scholarships. He worked part-time jobs. When he left for college, Lillian cried quietly in the doorway of their apartment, smiling at the same time. She told him to go out there and become the man she already knew he was. He did more than that. He graduated at the top of his class. He started a small delivery service with a borrowed van and 1 employee. That business grew, and grew, and grew. Years passed. The apartment above the laundromat turned into a comfortable house on a quiet street. Lillian moved in with him. He made sure she never had to work again. He built her a sunroom because she loved the light. He hired a gardener because she liked to sit outside and talk to the flowers like they were old friends. When he married a woman named Vanessa, he believed he was building the final piece of a happy life. Vanessa was elegant, well-educated, and came from a wealthy family in the suburbs. She moved easily through charity galas and business dinners. She knew how to speak to investors and how to charm reporters. At first, she seemed kind to Lillian. She called her Mama Lillian in front of guests. She bought her shawls and slippers. But there was something in her smile that never quite reached her eyes. Marcus noticed it once or twice, but he brushed it off. Vanessa came from a different world. Maybe she just needed time to adjust. Lillian always told him to be patient with people. She believed most hearts were softer than they looked. One spring morning, Marcus left for a 2-day business trip in New York. It was supposed to be routine. Meetings with investors, a dinner with partners, a flight back the next evening. But halfway through the trip, the final meeting was canceled. The investors needed more time. Marcus didn't like wasted hours, so he booked an earlier flight home. He didn't tell Vanessa. He thought it would be a nice surprise. The car pulled into the driveway just after sunset. The house lights were on. Everything looked normal from the outside. But as soon as he stepped onto the front porch, he heard raised voices through the door. Vanessa's voice was sharp, cold, and angry, not the polished tone she used at social events. This was something else entirely. Marcus opened the door quietly. The sound of something breaking echoed from the living room. He stepped inside and followed the noise. What he saw made his chest tighten. Lillian stood near the coffee table, her hands trembling. A shattered porcelain vase lay at her feet. Water spread across the hardwood floor. Vanessa stood in front of her, face twisted with anger, pointing toward the hallway like she was ordering a stranger out of her house. Marcus's voice cut through the air before he even realized he was speaking. He asked what was going on. Vanessa turned, her expression changing instantly. The anger melted into surprise, then into a strained smile. She said she didn't expect him back so soon. She said it was just a small misunderstanding. But Lillian didn't speak. She just looked down at the floor, like a child who had been scolded. Marcus asked again, more firmly this time. Vanessa explained that Lillian had broken the vase. It was an expensive antique. She said she had told her many times to stay out of the living room. When the cleaning staff wasn't there, Marcus felt a slow, heavy weight settle in his chest. He looked at Lillian. Her eyes were red. Her shoulders were slumped. She looked smaller than he had ever seen her. He asked why she had been in the living room. Lillian hesitated. Then she said softly that she was just trying to dust the shelves. She didn't want the house to look messy while Marcus was away. Vanessa let out a short, sharp laugh and said that wasn't her job. She said the house already had staff for that. She said some people just didn't know their place. The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus felt something inside him shift. It wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was quiet, but it was final. He told Lillian to go sit in the sunroom and rest. His voice was gentle, the way it used to be when he was a boy and she was the one giving comfort. She nodded and walked slowly down the hallway. Then Marcus turned back to Vanessa. The conversation that followed was calm on the surface, but every word carried weight. He asked her what she meant by knowing her place. He asked why she spoke to his mother like an employee. He asked how long this had been happening. Vanessa tried to brush it off. She said Marcus was being dramatic. She said she was just setting boundaries. She said someone had to keep order in the house. But Marcus remembered every late night Lillian spent folding his clothes, every dollar she saved for his school supplies, every whispered prayer over his bed when he was sick. There was no world in which that woman deserved to be spoken to like she was less than family. He walked to the hallway and called for the housekeeper. When she came, he asked gently if Lillian had been treated differently when he wasn't home. The housekeeper hesitated, glancing at Vanessa. Then she quietly admitted that things were often tense. She said Lillian mostly stayed in her room because she didn't want to upset anyone. Marcus felt a deep, aching disappointment settle into his bones. Not anger, not yet, just a heavy sadness. He realized that while he was out building his empire, the one person who built him had been shrinking inside her own home. That night, Marcus didn't shout. He didn't slam doors. He simply told Vanessa that some lines, once crossed, couldn't be erased with apologies. Respect wasn't a decoration you put on for guests. It was the foundation of a home. In the days that followed, the house felt different, quiet, reflective. Marcus spent more time in the sunroom, sitting beside Lillian. They talked about small things, old memories, the smell of the laundromat, the first time he tried to cook and nearly burned the kitchen down. She kept telling him not to worry, that she was fine. But he could see the hurt in her eyes, and he promised himself that no one would ever make her feel small again. Weeks later, he surprised her with something she never expected. He drove her to the old neighborhood where they used to live. The laundromat was still there, though the sign had faded. The apartment above it looked smaller than he remembered. Next door, a building was being renovated. Fresh paint, new windows, a bright sign out front. He handed Lillian a small set of keys. He told her it was a community center, a place for foster kids, single parents, and seniors who needed support. A place where people could find warm meals, tutoring, and someone who cared enough to listen, and it was named after her. She stood there in silence, her eyes filling with tears. She said she didn't deserve something like that. Marcus smiled and told her she deserved the whole world, but this was just a start. The center opened a month later. The first day, Lillian stood at the door greeting every visitor like they were family. The smell of fresh biscuits drifted through the hallway, just like it used to in their tiny apartment. Marcus watched from across the room, feeling a quiet peace settle in his heart. Because success wasn't measured by how big your house was or how many companies you owned. It was measured by the people you lifted up along the way. In the end, the story of that house wasn't about broken vases or arguments in the living room. It was about remembering who held your hand when you had nothing and making sure they never walked alone again. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness echo the longest, and your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear today.